Well, good evening, everybody. We are going to get started. Just by way of introduction, my name is the senior pastor here. Pastor Amy Runyon's just walking in the back there right now. And we are excited and glad that you are here. The idea of this really emerged from our Faith and Justice Committee, which is one of our strongest elements of our congregational life. And we were excited to come on board with their idea of presenting the alternative and the importance of this vote coming up in the election. So I'm going to introduce to you Carol Engelhardt, who's going to tell you how the night's going to go. Carol's the chair of our Faith and Justice Committee. But as the pastor, I just wanted to say that, you know, from our perspective, not only is this incredibly important, but we wanted to not create a debate atmosphere. We wanted to create an atmosphere where both sides could present the reasons why and behind their stance on this important thing, and then give people a chance to ask a question or two. And so there are pieces of paper and pens and pencils for you to ask a question. I only ask that you would please print. Handwriting's getting harder and harder to read these days. Can I put a motion in for the election that we teach handwriting again in school? Anyway, again, thank you for coming out on a Thursday night, and welcome to our beautiful historic sanctuary, and welcome, Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Engelhardt. I'm the chair of Faith and Justice, and we are so thankful to be a part of Calvary Church. And when this important amendment came up, we wanted to have a voice because we are the heart and soul in the city of Minneapolis, and we want to reflect that, and we want to be here to listen, discover, and find out next steps. But before I introduce Karina, who will be doing the question and answers, I do want to let you know Janae Bates wasn't able to come tonight. She's ill. So we have Karina here, who is also the campaign director for Say Yes. Yes for Minneapolis, sorry. But I want us to take 30 seconds and pause to remember today is George Floyd's birthday, and he was murdered. And that's why we are here. We are here because our city was in turmoil and grief. And all this came about to say, what do we do? So let's take 30 seconds to pause. Okay, now I'll let you know a little bit about how we're going to do things tonight. If you haven't gotten a flyer, there's people around that are ushers and welcomers that can give you a flyer, questionnaire to submit your questions. We'll be watching on YouTube because Janae wasn't able to come. And after that YouTube presentation, then we will be collecting questions. My husband and son, Dan and Ken, will go around and collect your questions. And then Pastor Jeff and I will ask them of our expert. But we want to thank Karina, who's Karina Smith, and she and I have a lot in common. She's a nurse also, and reproductive justice nurse in public health, working in St. Paul, making sure people have reproductive justice for their health. And then she transitioned to this in organizing, community organizing, and helping out with the Yes for Minneapolis campaign. And we are very glad to have her here tonight to help answer our questions. So No, so we will be watching the video. And if anybody needs a question here for the answer, would you raise your hand and we'll hand one out to you, so you have one ready to write. Does anybody need the questions? No. Okay, all right. You do. Some people over there need the questions. Okay, so Jackie will start the video and we'll watch the video.
Hello, everyone. My name is Minister Janae Bates. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the communications director with Hello, everyone. My name is Minister Janae Bates. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the communications director with Yes for Minneapolis. And today we are going to talk about why we're excited and we want you to be excited to go and vote yes on City Question 2. And you can vote today, well, or you can make a plan to vote today. But no matter what, we need you to vote by November 2nd. All right, and so we're going to talk about why that's incredibly important and an incredibly important action to take. So we know that in the city of Minneapolis, there is currently a system that actually hasn't been working for most people. And the reality is that when crisis happens, there's only one kind of response in the current system, and that means that that is an armed police response. And so what voting yes on question 2 does is it now opens the options and allows for an entire range of different qualified professionals to be at the ready, to give a right-sized response to meet the needs of the people of Minneapolis. Because currently we're asking Minneapolis police officers to do way too many things. We want them to be counselors and social workers and homeless outreach and crisis interveners, when the reality is there are qualified and trained people and experts and professionals out there who do that job and do it really well. And so we should make sure that we have those kinds of resources at our hands, at the ability to be able to be deployed and to work alongside police officers, to work in consortium with them into a comprehensive and integrated department. And there's only one way to do that. And that means we have to vote yes. And so when we're telling you all to vote yes, we want to tell you why it's really important to. And the reality is, in the city of Minneapolis, people are able and deserve to have a series of things. One, to move away from an armed police only response. To directly address the issues of violence in community, and to do that now. Not to go and create another focus group, create another research project, do another study. We've been doing that. That has happened for many, many years, if not decades at this point. We actually get to start to really tackle those big problems now. And doing so allows us to get to the root of violence and crime and decrease it over time. This Department of Public Safety allows us to embrace a holistic model of public safety, which means that it is completely dedicated to the whole person, allowing humanity and dignity to be at the core. And in order to have that, we get to fund and resource and support trained, qualified professionals. In this department, we get citywide representation and accountability with those who protect and serve. And then last, but certainly not least, we get to do all of this. We get to have this kind of reform done in a racially equitable way. Now, all of that sounds great, I'm sure you're saying or thinking to yourself. This is exactly what we want, and I don't feel this manifested right now. I'm not understanding why we don't have it. So we have to talk about how we got here to the place where it's absolutely necessary and why we still don't have it. Which means we got to talk about the big blue elephant in the room, and that is the Minneapolis Police Department, the container that currently holds police officers for Minneapolis. MPD is the poster child for reform. They have had reforms on everything from trainings on de-escalation, implicit bias trainings, mental health trainings. They have implemented body camera usage. They have had a series of attempts at civilian oversight of MPD, which have either been proven ineffective or have been completely dismantled by the Police Federation over time. The US Department of Justice has made several interventions with MPD, one in 93, another in 2016, and they are conducting one right now in 2021. There have been many reform-minded police chiefs who have been committed to making big changes, big cultural, institutional changes within the department. Folks like Tony Boza, Janae Bates, and even the current police chief, Chief Arredondo. And yet, the problem has remained. The Minneapolis Police Department has continued to be resilient against these changes. And so last year, all of us witnessed a 9-minute murder. And when that happened, people across race, across income, across region, across gender, across ideology, they filled the streets and they lifted up their voices courageously. And they said, you know what, we cannot allow this to keep happening. We recognize for sure that Black lives do in fact matter. And so in that recognition of connecting all of our humanity to one another and making that proclamation that Black lives matter, the people of Minneapolis chose to make that proclamation a policy. And so they used the vehicle of Yes for Minneapolis to do that. And so Yes for Minneapolis is a coalition of residents, small businesses, organizations, educators, survivors, elected officials, families, folks all across the city who are ready and excited to say yes, who are ready and excited to raise the standard of public safety, to expand public safety in the city of Minneapolis. And so you just see a very small snippet along your right-hand side of the organizations that have been committed and are dedicated and are working to make this dream of expanded public safety an actual reality for the people of Minneapolis. You also see in that upper right corner, the handful of folks who have been working really, really hard in order to block this from happening. They have really decided that instead, they would like to consolidate the power and the resources of the city and funnel them to the Police Federation, because that has been the group of people who's really held on and gets to dictate what public safety looks like. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how that's worked out, because all of us, I'm sure, already feel how that has manifested. And so what does saying yes on question 2, what does that actually do? I am so glad you asked. The reality is that question 2 would replace the current container that Minneapolis currently has called the Minneapolis Police Department with a Department of Public Safety. And so the Department of Public Safety will change the current armed police only model of public safety to instead be rooted in a public health approach, to be both proactive and responsive. It allows the city to include a mix of different strategies, wide-ranging strategies, and different types of staff, like those trained mental health workers, like crisis specialists, like emergency responders, like homeless outreach, like substance abuse crisis responders. And we also get to have police officers, and we use them when necessary. And I do know that for some, it has given a tinge of hesitation that we name if necessary, when necessary. But the reality is that's how we should steward all of our resources. Being good stewards of your resource should actually be celebrated, that we are making sure that we use police officers in the well-trained, well-disciplined, accountable, and transparent approach that police officers, armed police officers, should be used in. And as many police officers, including the current Chief Arredondo, have stated over and over again, they're getting called into issues where law enforcement actually shouldn't be. And that is a majority of the calls they receive. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're actually sending the right size response. And by voting yes on question 2, we get to have that. That allows us to have flexibility in staffing and budgeting to meet the city's needs, their safety needs, which aren't currently being met. And again, this allows us to have a transparent and accountable relationship that has citywide representation. Now, what do I mean by citywide representation? Well, let's talk about the way that the Minneapolis Police Department is currently set up. Currently, this department is an anomaly. And what I mean by that is every single department in the city charter is set up in the way in which you see on your right-hand side, where there is the mayor and the city council. They work together to nominate and appoint a department commissioner. That department commissioner then is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the department. They are the ones who will manage and have leadership of that department. Now, the benefit of this model is that you get full citywide representation. And that works out very well because city council members represent a group of their people. In Minneapolis, about 30,000 people, whereas the mayor is over 400,000. The other thing in the city of Minneapolis, which unfortunately, though being a really abundant city, has an incredibly stark issue with racial disparities. And this plays out in a whole series of things, from healthcare to wages to housing, but also to democracy. And so the city of Minneapolis is positioned in a way in which a mayor only technically needs to govern a handful of wards and still win their seat. The reality is city council members don't function that way. They need to win their entire ward, which means that they are accountable to those folks in their ward. And so having a department that is actually set up that allows that citywide representation gives folks the opportunity and the ability to have much more say about what keeps them safe than the current system that really is just funneled to the mayor and the police chief. The other thing that we know about the way that this is played out in the city of Minneapolis currently is that when you have a situation where the mayor is the head of what we call, or in the city charter has unilateral and complete control of the police department, it has actually siloed out much of the city from being able to have access, decision-making, transparency with not just the police department, but in general, public safety. And so we want to align the Department of Public Safety to be like all the other city departments in the charter. And so here is what your ballot looks like, folks who live in Minneapolis. You will have this beautiful ballot that has 3 questions on it. And today, we, of course, have been talking about question number 2 for the Department of Public Safety. So, of course, we want you to make sure that you're filling in that great yes, because this, again, is really about expanding expanding public safety across the city of Minneapolis, most certainly raising the standard of public safety. Now, the other thing about raising the standard of public safety, that means that we want you to also consider voting yes on question 3. We know that it is a necessity for people to have stable housing. That is one of the many things when we're talking about a comprehensive, complete, holistic way for people to be safe. We know that folks having a stable place to live now and for future generations to come, that is an important piece of being safe. And so we want you to vote yes on question 3. And then lastly, when we're talking about the very particular and ways in which questions 2 and 3 got on this ballot, it was led by the people of Minneapolis. Both of these questions were put on here because the people of Minneapolis said it is time that we raise the standard of public safety. It is time that people have a say about where they live and the conditions of which they live and their ability to afford where they live. What we know about question 1 is this was actually created by an unelected body of people that actually waters down and weakens the ability for question 2 and 3 to be implemented to the fullest and most robust possible way for the people of Minneapolis. And so when it comes to this idea of mayoral control, that actually would make it far more like all of the city departments to have the same structure that I mentioned before with in the previous slide, where all of those city departments would actually be like the current Minneapolis Police Department. And just to remind you all, the current Minneapolis Police Department is the only department in the city that does not have full citywide representation, but is actually under mayoral control. It's also the only department that is getting national headlines of abuse and mistrust and sometimes murder. And so we are definitely saying folks should probably put a big no on that one. But again, we're saying no to question 1, yes to question 2, and yes to question 3. All right, so very briefly, how will question 2 be put into practice? I am so glad you asked. Question 2 is the only concrete plan to have the Department of Public Safety. And that plan requires that in that first 30 days of transition, that the mayor and the city council will nominate and appoint an interim Department of Public Safety commissioner, as we mentioned before. Now, then after they have that, they get to have a data-driven and community engagement process in order to establish the right number of officers and right number of qualified professionals, including police, again, into this department. They also get to establish a budget that properly supports the qualified professionals that will be a part of the department. This transition is going to take time, right? This is really about making sure that we are fully integrating community. The community gets to have a say, which unfortunately isn't happening right now, but after voting yes, that's what takes place. And because Yes for Minneapolis it's a Black-led, though multiracial, multi-generational organization, we want to prioritize the communities that are the hardest and first impacted around public safety, who also coincidentally have the least say right now. And so when we're thinking about wards 4 and 5, for example, North Minneapolis, these places absolutely need to be a part of the conversation and part of the creation and development about who's going to be in their neighborhoods, who's going to be the people that they can call when crisis happens, who are the folks they can trust to show up when they need them. And sometimes that will be an armed police officer, sometimes it'll be a mental health specialist, sometimes it'll be a combination, but they get to have a say about that. And so while that transition takes place, the police department will continue to function in its day-to-day response and patrol until there can be a full and smooth integration of those police officers from the current Minneapolis Police Department into the Department of Public Safety. They get to have that, and no matter how long that transition period is in place. There is currently an ordinance in place because of good governance. An ordinance already exists. It has existed for many, many decades that will allow the city of Minneapolis to retain a police response every single step of the way, every stage of the transition. And we'll also pop in the link for you where you can read the ordinance for yourself. And so I just want to show you again, kind of like the timeline, if you will, of this implementation. And I want to be clear that the beautiful thing about this plan is that it prioritizes the safety of community, most certainly prioritizes those who are the hardest and first impacted, and it gets to move at the pace of the city. So the fact that you really want to make sure that community is engaged every single step of the way, I cannot stress that enough. We want to make sure that folks get to have a say. That's the beautiful thing about getting to say yes. Now, why do we need this charter change? Can't we do this without that? You're starting to probably already hear a little bit of those talking points from the mayor, who agrees that all these things should happen, except the piece where he doesn't get to have unilateral complete control. But the reality is that no, and we know that this is the reality, that no, we actually can't do this without the charter change, because if we could, we would have already done it. I mean, the mayor's been in place for 4 years now, and if he could have done it, I'm sure he would have, right? So let's talk about why we don't currently have it and why we absolutely have to change the charter to make it happen. So in the city of Minneapolis, we got to do a little bit of history first. In 1961, the mayor of that time and the police federation of that time struck a deal. And unfortunately, this deal rigged the rules against the residents of Minneapolis and didn't put at the forefront the safety of those in the city. And that deal was essentially that if the mayor could have unilateral control of the police department, so that was their cut of the deal, then the police federation got to put what is equivalent to a police federation contract into the city's constitution, into the city charter. And so Minneapolis is an anomaly in that it is the only city in the entire state of Minnesota that has this, that has what's equivalent to a police federation contract in their city charter. So that means for the past 60 years, Minneapolis has been locked into a armed police only response that also equates to about 35% of the city's annual budget. It goes directly into armed police only and allows no flexibility for us to add all of these other qualified professionals into the department. And so we have to change the charter in order for it to be fully integrated and fully comprehensive, because otherwise we'll have departments in the way that we do now where it gets piecemealed. For example, you may have heard of the Office of Violence Prevention that is currently in the health department. It's a great initiative that has a lot of wonderful potential. They've really been making magic happen on a shoestring budget, and it's been completely unsustainable. In order to make it what we need it to be, and actually to make it an integrated and comprehensive response, then we needed to also be a part of a Department of Public Safety. And so it is no longer 1961. We get to make what used to be and what currently is impossible, we get to make it possible. And it really just means we have to update the charter. So some of you are like, I've heard this sounds great, it sounds amazing, but I heard that what you're all doing is really just trying to abolish the police or defund the police. And the reality is, no. It's been a talking point from our opposition, who has really been stirring up this disinformation very purposefully to make us all afraid of one another. And it's just not grounded in reality. The fact is that this is and always has been about expanding public safety in the city of Minneapolis so that folks have more of what they need to keep one another safe. And that means that we get to use all of the tools in the toolbox, and that includes police officers. That is the reality of what this change does. And so I am incredibly grateful for all of you. Oh, it looks like we did update the slide. Okay, so I am actually going to stop screen share, and I am going to pass it to MJ, I do believe, right? MJ, yes, there you are. Okay, I'm going to pass it to MJ, one of our dynamic organizers. And I just want to give a quick reminder before I do pass to MJ, we are going to take questions. So please pop those questions into the chat. We'll take them after MJ and Veronica do a quick presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and sharing space with us. So my name is MJ. I'm one of the organizers at Yes for Minneapolis, and I want to give a brief overview of our canvassing program, name some volunteers who are doing this work for us, why volunteer, and how to volunteer. So first of all, our canvassing program. We have weekend door knocks every Saturday at 11 a.m. and every Saturday at 2 p.m. And we also have Sunday door knocks at 1 p.m.
And now we are going to have the questions collected, and then Pastor Jeff and I can ask Karina the questions.
All right, once again, thank you for being here tonight. Katrina. I have received numerous mailings from an organization that states a vote for Amendment 2 will eliminate the police. I think the answer was clear on that. There still will be police. But that there will be no police chief position. Is that correct? There's no police chief position.
Can folks hear me? Can folks hear me now? Now? Mic check? Test, test. Test, test. Mic check. Test, test, test.
It might be helpful to take the mask off when you can understand what you're saying.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Test, test. Okay. Great. So the question was if the police chief position is being removed from the city charter. The police chief position is not being removed from the city charter. So Chief Arredondo can keep that position. What is being stricken is the Minneapolis Police Department, as we stated, which is being replaced with the Department of Public Safety. The police chief can continue in title. Chief Arredondo doesn't need to be fired, which is something other folks might have heard. He could also potentially be the commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. I know folks definitely feel really good about his leadership that he's had, and so no is the answer.
We have several congregants that live in North Minneapolis, and their questions are, they are concerned that the increase, there's been several shootings and killings in North Minneapolis with gun violence, and they're saying, how will the new public safety department address these types of incidents? And they're speaking about shooting at a barber shop, a killing of a 6-year-old girl. And included with this question is some of the church members are saying our neighbors are voting no because they're afraid to not have police. So they are asking you, what do we do about the violence in North Minneapolis, and why should I vote for this when I want the police to respond?
So again, police will be part of the Department of Public Safety. We are very clear that in the state, there are city and state ordinances that mandate that police respond to specific calls.
So police have to exist. So I know that, part of that question is folks are concerned about police being removed, and so that is not actually a truth. The other aspect of it around community violence that folks are experiencing right now, and having a Department of Public Safety that's rooted in a public health approach allows us to actually intervene and prevent further community violence, right? I think that there are some root causes that need to be addressed that aren't currently being met by our armed police only response. And even prior to the murder of George Floyd, these have been issues that our communities have been grappling with for a really long time. And even with a fully funded at full capacity department, Minneapolis Police Department, those issues still continue. And so by having a Department of Public Safety that allows us to have qualified professionals, a range of them that can actually address what our community needs, will actually address and intervene in the community violence that folks are currently experiencing.
We examine the type of professionals respond to emergencies. Would it fall to a 911 dispatcher to decide who is sent?
What I heard is, will it respond to 911 emergencies?
Will the 911 dispatcher decide what professionals?
Got it, yes. So 911 will still be the number that folks should call. That'll still be the case for the Department of Public Safety. And yes, the 911 operators will be trained to assess the situation and actually deploy the qualified professional that's needed for that situation.
Try to do this, but my handwriting's not gonna be better, so I can give the person in advance. After my experience working in East Phillips, and the city council, I had a hard time trusting them. Is there a way we can do this independent of the city council?
Is there a way that we can have a Department of Public Safety independent of our city council? Is the question. Yeah, so I think that's pretty similar to the current system that we have, right? So we have a Minneapolis department that is under unilateral sole control of the mayor. So that's what it looks like for us to not have a department that matches the rest, every other department of the city that includes city council oversight.
In the presentation, Janae said, yes means no more focus groups on violence. We can make change now. What is the plan for addressing violence now?
So I think that's pretty similar to kind of what I've already touched on, is about this new approach. The Department of Public Safety is changing our city's infrastructure and aligning it with our values, again, of prevention, of intervention, of public health. And that actually allows us to create this new department with those values. So part of that plan is the full integration of qualified professionals. We know that we have people whose job it is to actually respond to these types of situations, and they're really good at it. We also know, on the other hand, that police are telling us, we have evidence from focus groups, from studies, that they're responding to calls that they actually aren't equipped to respond to. I think that's something that people even, out of our budget from last year, we removed report-only calls to 311, right? We said 911 doesn't need to deal with those. So there's a lot of, incremental changes that have been happening. And part of us doing this charter change is to actually fully move us in the right direction to align and expand our public safety services.
This question is, are there cities that you would point to as model examples that a Department of Public Safety is working? Are a different response system is working?
Thanks for that question. Yes, so actually in the state of Minnesota, Bloomington and Richfield both use a Department of Public Safety. Across the nation, people often look to Colorado. I believe it's in Denver that has a Department of Public Safety. Those are like just some top ones off the top of my head, but we definitely have some local that are very successful.
If question 2 passes and the Department of Public Safety is installed, would a circumstance like that of George Floyd, in which the police were called because of an alleged counterfeit bill, be an example of a situation in which a non-police, unarmed Department of Public Safety responder would be the one to respond? Question. If so, which type of responder would come and how would that be determined?
So yes, that could be an example of a situation in which you wouldn't need an armed police only response. And as far as the type of responder that would respond to that call, that really gets to be determined by the city council and the mayor for the type of professionals that we have. So I could, say anything right now in this moment that could be like, speculation for the type of person, but I think there are many people, right? You could have a social worker if, George Floyd actually needed more resources. There could be a wide variety of folks who could actually respond to that situation that isn't an armed police only response.
We have on Zoom members. If question 1 and 2 both pass, would the new Commissioner of Public Safety report only to the mayor?
If question 1 were to pass, would the Commissioner of the Department of Public, and question 2 were to pass, would the Commissioner report only to the mayor? Correct. Yep. So it would, this Department of Public Safety could still exist, still be created, and it would look very similar, as well as all the other departments within our city would all be structured the way that the Minneapolis Police Department is currently structured. So mayoral oversight only.
This question change the department at all? If so, how?
So question 2 is removing, because it's removing the minimum requirement for the staffing, it's removing the requirement that 35% of the city budget go to the Minneapolis Police Department. So that would be a change to funding.
It's more of a comment, and then I'll try to put the question as well. The 30-day period that is mentioned is what a lot of, or most folks are worried about when I door knock for my city council candidate and we talk about question 2. They think it's too fast for us to know what true job would even be if it's very different than a police chief. So do we know what the job description of the Commissioner of Public Safety would look like?
So the job description gets created by the mayor and the city council. I think what people get scared about or think is really fast about the 30-day period is that there's been disinformation that the Department of Public Safety needs to be fully implemented within 30 days. In actuality, to be compliant with the charter change, they just need to hire an interim department commissioner.
Would it be possible that this also addresses the root issues of systemic racism and injustice in the police union and police training?
That is definitely a part of the hope and intention there. By being able to have police no longer work in isolation, by actually being implemented, integrated with all the rest of the safety infrastructure of the city, that will actually change a lot of the issues that have been brought about by the Police Federation.
Okay, we have quite a few here. In emergency situations, how can the city council make rapid decisions as needed? That's the first one.
Thanks for asking that. So in the actual charter change, in an emergency situation, the mayor actually assumes complete control of the department. That has not changed from the charter.
Okay. Number 2, the charter system as it stands seems more stable. This can be good and bad, but city council seems too flexible. Can you respond to this dilemma?
You said the first part about it's stable.
Let me repeat it. I'm a little confused by it too. The charter system as it stands seems more stable, the way it is as it stands. This can be good and bad, but city council seems too flexible. Can you respond to this dilemma? I think they're meaning the city council would be overseen.
Mm-hmm. So the city charter is essentially like our city's constitution, right? So we typically don't make really big or significant changes to it often. What city council gets to do whenever they are elected, they get to make ordinances, right? And when people don't agree with those ordinances, people get to use their power of the local democracy and unelect those folks. And then, when we elect other, folks that are aligned with our vision and values, they get to then create new ordinances. So I would say they serve different purposes, and our city charter should reflect what our city currently needs. And our council and elected officials and leaders should listen to their constituencies about what they say needs to be addressed.
There are a lot of questions, so we'll wrote this one's all one. How long will the safety commissioner serve if this is passed, the length?
How long will the department?
How long will the public safety commissioner serve? What would be the?
Gotcha. That also gets to be determined by the city council and the mayor when they create that job description. I think would probably be aligned with the typical terms for department commissioners, which I believe is around 4 or so years. But again, they get to decide what that looks like.
Next question is, who decides what services are needed at any given call, any 911 call?
So the dispatcher typically who receives a 911 call, asks what their emergency is, will then assess what services need to be deployed, right? So even currently, they assess if you need an ambulance and a police officer, or if you just need a police officer, or if you need fire. So it would be a pretty similar process.
Last question is, what will police officers be responding to?
In the Department of Public Safety, what will police officers be responding to? So I think similar to the ordinance, what mandates that police respond to, and I think part of this gets dependent on the rest of the qualified professionals that are involved and integrated. But at the very minimum, what the ordinance mandates is that police officers carry out arrests, police officers carry out warrants, police officers have a host of duties that only themselves, police officers, licensed peace officers can carry out, that no other qualified professional can carry out. So that's just, you know, a couple, but there's a list within those ordinances.
So there basically still will be a police presence, vehicles driving. Okay, I think that answers this question.
I have some questions. All right. If anybody lives in Minneapolis, you've been getting lots of flyers in the mail. You've been getting lots of things on TV and radio ads and everything else. And after George Floyd was murdered, there was a lot of messaging nationally of Minneapolis defunding and abolishing the police. So I am asking, would this defund and abolish the police as we know it?
This would not abolish the police as we know it, because police would continue to exist. This would replace the Minneapolis Police Department with the new Department of Public Safety. And this would allow for further flexibility around our spending and resourcing of the Department of Public Safety by removing the barriers that block and necessitate that we only have an armed-only response.
Okay, actually, I kind of have more of a three-question in a way. I know, if I heard it right, I know in some states, police officers order to work in that department they have to live in that neighborhood. Is that true? And if it is, how come they can't do it here?
Yes. Yeah, so it's definitely true that it's, some ways that police departments function, those officers have to live in proximity of the neighborhood that they patrol. I think that that's definitely been a reform that folks have implemented within the state of Minneapolis, state of Minnesota.
Are they trying to do that? Are they think about this?
I believe that's something that's currently been implemented with our current Minneapolis department.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have another question. On that one, I said that the city council will be doing, overseeing housing, is that correct? On the
That's-
question 3.
Okay, got it. Okay, yes. So
Why does the city council have control over that? And what excuse would they have? We wanted to know what you're doing for them. Rent control.
So
What is, I mean, I need to know why city council and then it is. What policy are they using to implement what they're supposed to be doing, okay?
yeah, so I am not an expert on question 3. I didn't write that policy. I believe there were 2 options for how they implemented it. So there were 2 petitions. One was a renter-led one, and one was one that asked the city council to be able to implement the policy for next year. And that's the one that moved forward. I don't know if I would be able to answer the full of the question around what it is that they would be doing or implementing, but it was put on the ballot through community, and I think community is working with the city council to implement what it is that they're asking for.
I can speak to the.
Great.
Resident.
You want to use this, Dan?
Yes. Start the residency case. My name is Dan Engelhardt. I represent state employees with Mayoral, Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, which is not going to have any weigh in on this. Just so you know, I've worked in politics, and it used to be requirement for anyone employed by the city of Minneapolis, you know, as a municipality, not public schools, not the park board, but, you know, city of Minneapolis, just to understand Minneapolis government a little bit, that you had to live in the city. In 1998, the governor was Jesse Ventura, and the former Hennepin County Sheriff, Stanek, was a state legislator, a state representative. They called it the Stanek Law because he authored it, and it passed, and Jesse Ventura signed it into law, making it illegal for a municipality to require residency. So it's now state law that a municipality can't do that. And the chances of overturning that and getting it back where it has to be a residency requirement are Not good in my professional opinion, but just so you know, it's illegal for a municipality to do that. The city could incentivize. They could say, here's a, an additional stipend for choosing to live in the city. Here's some help with housing or different things like that. And Fry says he's doing it, but I don't see it. I'm sorry. But that, that's too much. But anyway, it's against the state law to require residency. That's the full answer on that.
It's our state law.
Correct.
But-
Yeah, 1998.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, just because you keep answering
We
the
can.
budget question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just come up here. I can't, people want to be able to see. We have about 30 people on Zoom watching as well. Thank you.
Okay.
And then we'll see if there's one or two more and we'll wrap it up.
I've been a resident of Minneapolis for 56 of my 63 years. For the past 30 years, as far as I'm concerned, the police apparently haven't, because they haven't been doing their job. And I've always thought it was because they're not getting enough money. And so when you kind of skim over the budget part of that, if you're taking money that would go to policing right now to put it in other things, maybe it's something as a city we can't afford to do. And I'm a mom of 8 mixed race children, so I'm speaking from both sides of that, and a victim of crime, and as a person who's gone to 20 funerals of Black murder victims where there has not been any justice yet. Okay, and so I'm pondering, budget-wise, you're saying it'll be part of the police budget, but I got a blue card in my wallet right now. I've been waiting for 2 years for an investigator to call me about a crime I was involved in. Nobody's ever called. And they said it'd be a few days. And I called again to ask them. Nobody's ever called. So if they're not doing their job with the money they got now, how are they gonna take care of the crisis we're in if we divvy up that budget between all those other, and that's just as a mom.
So the thing to kind of separate out is that currently in the charter, a mandated minimum 35% goes to the police department, but actually more than that goes to the police department. That's just the minimum. The funding for the new Department of Public Safety will actually be set by what the city needs. So that could also be more than 35% of that budget, and that gets to shift based on the needs of the city. So it wouldn't be divvying it up. It could be also expanding it. If the city decided to keep it at, 35%, or say the last budget that the Minneapolis Police Department got, again, it's a gradual transition. I'm sure that they'll be building up to actually be fully integrated and implemented with the qualified professionals that they need.
Who decides when it's funded and how much? Who will decide on that? When you set the funding, and when they know they have this budget, who decides which department gets this? Who decides that?
So the department commissioner would likely decide that with the heads of the departments. So even currently, the way that our budget is allocated is that the whole of the department gets a set amount of funding, but the city actually doesn't get to dictate how the departments within that department get funding.
Okay, our hour is up. I want to thank you because you're engaged in what you believe is the right course of action. I want to thank you for coming to be informed in as much as we could do tonight on this very important issue. In 2 weeks, Don and Sandra Samuels will be here, who are also deeply engaged in what they believe is the right course of action, and that is to vote no. And so what we're doing as a church is trying to present both sides and help you make the best educated decision you can. And so it's not a matter of, oh, you're engaged and you're not engaged. No, there are lots of people engaged. People have different opinions on how to both respond and address the root causes of violence. And so we have a lot of work to do as a community, as neighbors, as a city, and certainly as a church to be a part of that mix. So once again, thank you all for being here tonight. And Katrina, thank you for stepping in for Janae, and please greet her for us and tell her we hope she feels better soon.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Everyone for coming, and thank you for the volunteers that came to help. We couldn't have done it without everyone, and especially Jackie for
Yeah.
technology. Pastor Jeff is our fearless leader. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a lot to fear. Our services are at 10 o'clock on Sundays. If you're here and you want to know a little bit more about that.